All right, here we go once again. This is Coffee and Chat with Rev Bruce. Hey, I want to thank y'all for joining in. This is, another Saturday, not necessarily a sunny day here in San Diego, but we're doing this. And so before I bring my guest on, I want to make sure I share some things with you all. This is episode number 27. And one of the things I definitely have to thank, Sean Cannell and Think Media for, definitely sharing with me and others about the beauty of YouTube. But here's something that he shared not too long ago via video, caught him on Twitter. He said, don't expect people to understand your grind when God didn't give them your vision. You have to understand that in order to take yourself and your vision to some places that other people can't even see, you're going to have to go ahead and seek it and be it before they even get a whiff of it and get some grasp of what you're trying to do and what God has for you to do with your life. And so definitely tune in with Sean Cannell, Think Media. They've been a blessing to me. And to go along with that, we got this detox thing going on, right? And I want y'all to definitely join in with me. A 10-day detox challenge that we're doing. It is, for me, it is one of those things that I am definitely excited about. Check it out on the link. You know what I mean? I definitely want you to be part of that. And if you can follow along, I am doing as much as I can with it. And I want you to understand that this is part of where God is taking me. For y'all that know, I was online last week talking about health and health disparities, and that definitely is an issue that we need to keep in mind. And so this detox came up, and it definitely is a challenge. I'll say that. And so pop into this. My guest today, none other than, Clovis Honore, one of my good friends, not just in ministry, but also as community work, the collective work of building a better community. And so I don't want to delay this anymore. Welcome to the show, Clovis Honore. You got to unmute yourself, man.
So I have a Bluetooth headset, and sometimes the mute on it works and sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes I got to mute myself on the computer, and I forget that I have to do that now. That's new to me. Again, I say good morning and welcome. Thank you for having me on the show this morning, Brother Bruce. It's coffee. I saw you drinking it. It's coffee with Bruce, but I'm drinking tea because the caffeine in the coffee kind of pushes me a little too far. And you can see I talk fast already, and that's without the caffeine, and that's caffeine-free tea. But thank you for tuning in, everyone who's here with us, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, sir.
Yes, sir. And brother, definitely, out of no disrespect, please drink your tea and enjoy yourself. But definitely understand that it is a pleasure on this side to have you here and to talk about something that's near and dear to both of us. And that's the concept of community, right? And right. So to get things started, I just want to recognize you are highly active and involved in the San Diego community, particularly the southeastern area of San Diego. So what would you say are the primary issues facing this particular community right now?
Well, I think it's interesting you use the phrase highly active, because I got to tell you, I mean, I do a thing here or there, but if I'm highly active, then that means that a lot of folks who are inactive. And I think maybe one of the most important things we need to do is more folks in the community need to be active around this. But to respond to your question, there's a couple of things I'll say. One, we like this phrase, it was made popular. It takes a village to raise a child. But there's some assumptions in there that we rarely unpack. For instance, what does it take to raise a village? right? If you look at the village, if you look at the community, and you look at the children, and you say, well, it takes a village to raise a child, but we see children who are being abused, children who are in foster care, children who are going to jail, children who are in gangs, children who are not being educated, children who are homeless, then you have to ask the question that is underneath that question is, what does it take to raise a village? Because if that's all going on and the children are not thriving, if a significant number, because let me back up a step. Most of our children are doing pretty good, and some of our children are doing excellent. But a lot of our children, way too many of our children, are not thriving. And if you have a number of children who are not thriving in your community, you have to ask if it takes a village to raise a child, and all these children are not getting good raising. And I'm not faulting parents. I'm saying village, right? Then we need to take a look at our village and see what it takes. And so my direct answer to your question is what we lack is infrastructure in virtually every area of life that counts. Neely Fuller pointed out 9 areas: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And what I think our challenge is as Black folks in America, Black folks around the world in many cases, even though, you see things going on in Ghana and Ethiopia and other places in the diaspora, here in the United States in particular, and in San Diego in particular, where I've been for the last 42 years, we lack that infrastructure. We are what is referred to as being internally colonized. And let me give you a definition I pulled off the net for this one. It says internal colonialism is the uneven effects of economic development on a regional basis, otherwise known as uneven development, as a result of the exploitation of minority groups within a wider society and leading to political and economic inequalities between regions within a state. And so that's very specific to what's happening in San Diego and what I think is happening to Black folks. And to kind of close the answer to that particular question, Black folk in San Diego by numbers represent just about 5% of the population, which means two things, which means one thing in particular here. And then the second thing, the first thing is that means we are not even a plurality, let alone a majority in any political jurisdiction in the entire county, which means we will be able to influence an election politically, but we cannot control any election in the election of any. So even though we have African Americans who are elected to office, whether it be the state offices, the city of San Diego, or the city of Lemon Grove or other places, those folks were not voted in exclusively by Black folks. In other words, we don't control those positions, and so we don't control those politicians or those. And I'll say that the ones that we have, I will confess that they're statespersons, not just politicians. But the second thing is that although we're 5% of the population generally, and larger in some areas, 15 in the last I looked at, 15 in the 4th City Council District, 12% in the city of Lemon Grove. Some other numbers are lower every place else. We are only 1% at best. 1% of the GDP of the county of San Diego. This county of San Diego GDP is approximately $250 billion. Our GDP is approximately $2 billion, maybe $2.5 billion. So at best, we're 1%, which means that we don't even control our own economics. We only represent 20% of the economic activity that takes place within our own. When I say community, I'm talking about all of our Black folks, wherever we may be living. We're only 20% of the economic activity that sustains us. That's air, water, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, information, recreation, all of that other folks control. And so when you say what is our primary issue is we have to come out of colonization. We have to figure out how we're going to do these things together that are in our own self-interest.
Well, and when you point out colonization and you point out the infrastructure, and a lot of times people misinterpret that term that you utilize, infrastructure. And I'm glad you broke it down into those 9 factors, because if we don't look at natural resources, if we don't look at economic transfer, if we don't look at social structures, most people tend to look at infrastructure in a very limited and narrow scope, which is in a microcosm. And so if you took all of what you just shared and then narrowed it down to southeastern San Diego, those numbers shift. Even when you look at the council district you mentioned, that's not the same council district that it was when George Stevens was councilman. And so that restructuring of that within the larger infrastructure now has not so much decolonized that neighborhood, but it has now created more of a melting pot within that district.
Right.
You know, and so the black vote is now diluted in that area because you now have another district, which is splitting what would be Logan Heights area and all that, and bringing in part of the college area into what was the fourth district. And so, you know, that's how it goes.
That's how it goes.
You know, in that same vein, right, I'll take you to this. In getting involved in community, name one person who's truly inspired your involvement in community.
Well, you already named him, Reverend George Stevens. And because I think Reverend George Stevens did at least two things. He positioned himself economically, and he positioned himself politically as independent. And I'm gonna say this way, and I know this is 2020, but I'm 60. I turned 60 a week ago, so I remember 1965. Right, I remember 1968. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so I remember riots, and I remember smoke, and I remember, the stuff that George Floyd is not new. When I used to walk to what is now Jesse Owens Park, I called it Sportsman's Park back then. We used to walk there and go swimming there, and that kind of crap. We saw that in the park on a regular basis, man. So, my terminology may seem a little bit dated, but it's from my perspective, right? So he set himself as independent financially and politically from the white power structure, right? He took the time and put in the effort and energy to organize and coordinate and communicate with the Black community of San Diego, that southeastern San Diego that used to be 20+% Black folks. And most folks, I don't know if they know about the tacit. Can we be real here? Or how much information we put on?
Take it there.
Okay. Not the only. y'all pray for me and pray with me. We have a Black city council person because there's a tacit political agreement in the city of San Diego to have a Black person on the city council. Right. Like I said, Black folks, last time I looked, are only 12% of the 15% of the fourth city council district, which means that if we have a Black person, it's because other folks are voting for that Black person. Even whether or not that Black person represents the Black people in the Black community of fourth city council district, which we have seen historically is not always the case. I think Monica Montgomery very well does. She's done that same kind of work. Again, this is a different world we live in than George Stevens, but George took the time and made the effort and made the sacrifices necessary to make himself sufficiently independent from the white power structure that he was able to speak truth to power in a way that actually challenged them, caused them to make some changes. But let's be for real. The reason we have term limits in the state of California is because Willie Brown was so doggone powerful. The white folks couldn't figure out how to get him out without limiting his term. So that's why we have term limits, because a Black man in the state legislature was controlling the state legislature. He's smart and he took care of business and he was independent and he was powerful. That's the same reason we have term limits in the city of San Diego, is because George Stevens was pushing the buttons of the power structure, and they couldn't figure out what they were going to do about him because he was independent. They couldn't pull his coattails. And so he spoke for the Black community. He worked for the Black community. He was independent of other structures and was able to get things done for our community. He organized, you and I sat on the Coalition of Neighborhood Councils together. He organized that with others, of course, and but promoted that and empowered that when he was the city council person. And that's why we have term limits now. And so let me stop there. It's all related, so we can keep moving on all these conversations.
And I appreciate what you shared about Reverend Stevens and Councilman Stevens, but also prior to him, Leon Williams was an active Black voice in San Diego. You can't go to the zoo or the wild animal park without seeing Leon Williams' name, engraved in there. And so part of that is, yes, Leon established some things, and then George Stevens came in and shook some things up and for lack of a better term, did rock the boat.
So you only let me name one person, so
yeah.
I know that. Go down a list, man. I got a long list. Cleo Malone. right? I mean,
Yeah.
another independent, powerful voice. Reverend George Walker Smith. I mean, Papa, right? I mean, even Reverend Dr. George Alice McKinney, right? Dr. Shirley Weber, of course. Dorothy Smith. I mean, the list goes on and on. Sister Meshach, Josh Von Walsh. God, I can't think of his last name. Von Walshuk, I think it's the last name. But Josh. We always know him as Josh. All these brothers and sisters that came before us. Who are still, some of whom are still, fighting in the background and doing stuff to make sure that we're sustained. And then there's a bunch of young people who are, Roosevelt Williams III, Tasha, Layla Aziz, come on, man. The list is very, very long. Of course, Francine Maxwell running the NAACP right now. Even my nemesis, man, a man who I don't even get along with, but the brother does some wonderful, powerful stuff, and that's Robbie Robinson, right? You got to give these brothers and sisters credit for laying that pathway. As folks say, we stand on these shoulders. These are powerful shoulders we've been standing on, and there's some powerful shoulders coming down the line that we have to get in back of and support. I mean, get up under and lift up, like some of the folks I've already mentioned. There's not just one, what truly inspired me. That's I have his picture on the wall in the other room. But that's my man. That's my main man. When I think of what I'm striving to do, what I'm trying to be effective in, I look at him as my example.
So you mentioned the agreement. Yeah, many of us in the community of Southeast San Diego, as any part of, the 4th District, as well as, Logan Heights,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of us have known it as, for ages, the agreement. And you called it by the official name. But the agreement primarily between Black and brown, and this idea that we would have representation of each has survived decades. But just if you could detour for a minute, do you think that agreement is in danger?
That agreement is always in danger. Whenever you, again, internal colonization, which means that, I'm gonna make some more enemies and challenging. I mean, there's some things I'm not gonna say, but there's value and there's power in having that seat, that 4th City Council seat, have it an African American on that seat. However, one of the challenges that creates, again, we go back to one of the first things I said. It takes a village to raise a child. What does it take to raise a village? When Tony Young was the city council person, there were a bunch of folks who I respect in the community who were supporters of his when he became the city council person. And then they looked at his policy work and activity he was involved and engaged in, and they kind of wanted to make some adjustments and changes to that. I'm not going to say they turned on him, but a coalition of Black folks in Southeastern San Diego got together and said, Tony, we don't like what you're doing. I think they actually pushed for a recall, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. And I they were talking to me. I was talking to them. I said, that's not efficacious, right? The point is, how do you pull the levers of power to achieve the goals that you want? And one person in a city council seat is not going to be enough to make that happen unless the community has the capacity to empower him or her to do that. Again, George Stevens created those councils or helped develop those councils and empowered them to be active and functional. They knew how to come down to city council meetings. They knew how to write. They knew how to even write legislation, right? They knew how to motivate and activate people on the street to do things. That kind of power is what needs to be implemented in order for us to be effective. It doesn't matter. I shouldn't say it that way. Let me say this differently. It's not unimportant who sits in the seat, but what's more important is how you manage the person who sits in the seat. Black folk voted like crazy, not enough, but they voted like crazy in 2016. Mm-hmm. And we got Donald Trump as the president. It's not necessarily essentially all that critical that he was not the person we voted for. What was critical was that when we lost that one, we didn't have the levers of power in place to get him and the federal government to do the things we wanted them to do, irrespective of who's in that house. When you look at people who pay for politicians, I'm going to say it that way, When you look at who makes contributions, corporations, especially now since we have Citizens United, and rich and powerful people who make, they'll give if they have Republican leaders, they'll give the Republicans $1 million,
yeah,
and they'll give the Democrats $250,000 because they want to be, because they're, we have this conspiracy theory that the Trump followers say with the cabal that controls the world. But if we're honest, why is Hawaii a state? Hawaii is a state because corporate interest went into Hawaii, fomented violence, stole the government, and then called the United States and said, send us troops so we can hold on to what we've stolen. Same thing in Panama, same thing in South America, same thing in Africa. And so when we say that, when people want to deny that there are corporate interests that control and manage governments,
you mean like oil?
Something like that. When Trump said we're going to bring back the coal industry, dude, that's not even financially logical or rational. There's nobody in the financial industry that's saying coal is going to survive, but you're going to put out this. So long story short, Black folks are going to have to find ways to empower ourselves. And it's not that difficult to figure out, right? Other communities do it all the time. If you look at North Park, if you look at, of course, La Jolla, if you look at even places like Claremont and other cities, people get together. Now, people get together and they say, these are the things we want. How do we get what we want? We're going to put in place the pieces we need to build that village that we need to make things happen the way we want them to happen. We know how does this politician vote? He votes this way on the environment. Why does he vote this way? Because certain people will give or not give to his campaign next time based on how he votes, and or people will vote or not vote based on how he votes on this particular issue. And so we need to make sure that we can manage all those components. How do people vote? Right. Mr. Clay of the who helped form the Congressional Black Caucus, in his book talks about there's two different kinds. You and I have had this conversation because we taught and trained this under San Diego Area Congregations for Change in UAMIC, that there's many different kinds of power, but the two critical kinds of power in America are economic power and political power. In other words, how much money do you have and how many people can you motivate? Because we still, even the United States of America, even on December 12th, 2020, the government, the political structure manages what happens in this country. We had a vote. Last time we had a vote, the dude lost by 3 million votes, and he still won the presidency. This time the dude lost by 7 million votes, and he's still arguing that he should have won for the presidency. But the process is playing itself out the way it's supposed to, even with all the things. Yeah, let's be honest. Trump has every right to pursue every legal process that's available to him to become president of the United States of America.
That's legal.
Well, that's legal. Right. And so quit screaming and hollering about, he filed a lawsuit. Well, let him file a lawsuit. But what you want to watch carefully is whether or not the process works, right? Because the process is working. Yes, he can file a lawsuit. We have laws. This is a lawtocracy. We're governed by the Constitution of the United States of America. Everybody likes to scream, nobody is above the law, even though folks get away with stuff. They still believe that no one's above the law. And
that's just hold on, man.
No, let me finish this.
That's a major semantic. That's a major semantic right there.
We're not going there. Let me just finish this one. Is that the United States Supreme Court with 8, right? We have 8 conservative judges now, 3 of which were appointed by Trump. Said we're going to follow the law, and the law is you lost, right? So that political process is critical, but the economic process is also critical, and we have to build that village, that infrastructure that's required to manage and control our own environment. Even if we have nobody in the city council who cares about us, we can still, who it looks like us, I should say, or who even cares about us.
But you mentioned infrastructure.
Still manage what we need to have.
You mentioned infrastructure and process, and those are critical. Because so what if you have the mass mobilization, but you have no agenda, you have no understanding of the process, and so that's where a lot of the mass movement per se can get lost in this groundswell of let's do something, but we haven't come into agreement about what to do. And I think that part of what you mentioned Tony Young, who, in my opinion, was on track to possibly be the first Black mayor of San Diego because he wasn't just a recognized councilman of District 4. Downtown loved Tony. Other areas of San Diego loved Tony. And so whatever transpired, he was still on track to be, that man. And to be honest, he could come back and jump in and possibly, take that. But I'm saying that deals with that idea of trying to say, well, we want to recount, right? That idea deals with, well, he's not doing what I thought he should be doing, is what a lot of folks say. Yeah. And his platform wasn't about what you thought he should be doing. You might have agreed with 2 or 3 things that he said, but you said, well, those other 3 things that he was mentioning, he can get to that later, but he needs to get to what's on my agenda. And I think that's where, particularly for San Diego, southeastern San Diego, we lose track because we start biting at the ones who get in about, well, here's how you ought to do it. Right. But oftentimes, a lot of those same people were not supporters of the person even getting in. And I'm gonna leave that alone.
Well, and that's one of the criticisms, and we talked about my friend on Facebook. One of the criticisms of Black folks in throwing all of our coins in, throwing all our coins in the same hat. In case most folks are talking about the Democratic Party. Again, okay, let me back up and say this: the Democratic Party is not Black infrastructure.
No,
the city of San Diego is not Black infrastructure. We ain't got no sports teams now, but even those were not Black infrastructure.
They just had Black people participating in them.
Pardon me?
They just had Black people participating in them.
There you go. What you said was critical. So let's be honest. When Black people in San Diego, those of us who consider ourselves Black or African American or whatever, right? African, Pan-African, all of that. When we pull ourselves together in a structure that is able to wield power, then we'll start getting what we want. As long as we are being pulled in every direction and moving in every direction, we're going to be manipulated by the folks who see all those fractures and factions. Somebody's going to say, here comes a foundation with $1 million, and they're going to give it to 1 or 2 organizations instead of 3 or 4 organizations, and they're going to make those 4 or 5 or 6 organizations fight for those dollars. The city council is going to say, we're going to do something called a promise zone or something, whatever they want to call it, and they're going to say we're going to do it in these neighborhoods, but not in those neighborhoods, and that's going to mean that Black folks will be fighting each other again, or at least competing with each other for those resources. As long as we allow those things to happen, Bruce, as long as Black folk in San Diego permit that to happen. We don't have to tolerate that. But as long as we do, that's what's going to continue to happen. Now, here's the biggest challenge. Here's the thing we have to overcome. When you say the one thing, let me go back to that. 99% of Black folk in San Diego, our bread is buttered by somebody other than a Black person. Which means that when we go to work, when we open our businesses, right, when we go to school, right, when I'm talking about higher education, when I'm talking about the elementaries and et cetera, the public school systems, all of those organizations, institutions are controlled by people who do not live and work almost never work in our communities, right? And when we say our communities, that's wherever Black folks get together and say, we're Black folks doing something for Black folks. So obviously we're spread out all over the county. Again, only about 15% of all the Black folk in San Diego County live in southeastern San Diego. Only 95%, out of 150,000, only about 100,000 live in the city of San Diego. So we are, well, I said before, internally colonized, and 99% of the money we bring into our communities comes from non-Black people, which means they don't have our interest in their consideration. Let's set it up. White family owns a company, and they employ 100 people. 10 of those people are Black people. Well, that's 10%. That's already twice, right? The quota. So you can't scream at them about not hiring more Black people. But So one of my things on my resume is I used to be an auditor for an insurance company, and I audited payrolls. And I can tell you from experience, but you can go to a company called Center on Policy Initiatives, and they actually did the research that about 30%, 20 to 30% of the money that you generate for a company, the company takes for itself, right, of your labor value. That's how they get rich. The average employee makes about $30,000. The average employer makes about $250,000. So they're making that money, that extra money, right? They're making all that money because there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yes.
So if I'm working 8 hours and you're working 16 hours, maybe you're worth twice. Maybe you might even worth 4 times what I'm worth, but you're not worth 10 times what I'm worth in labor value. So what happens is Black folks go to work. The money comes out of the community into the hands of people who they're not investing in Black things. They're not buying Black things. They're not going, they've seen Black Panther, but that's the only Black show they've ever seen. They've never come to Southeast or San Diego for community actors theater or Common Ground. So our resources are taken out of our community. That's the internal colonization.
Well, why would they, when they could actually entreat someone to, hey, bring your show to the La Jolla Playhouse, bring your show to Balboa Park,
and as opposed to bring your money to Southeastern San Diego,
and some people that you and I know would say, hey, they want us, we've made it.
Yeah, well,
I'm just saying that's the argument is beautiful, hypothetically and in a theoretical sense. But if the very people that you're speaking of don't have the same value of it, or there's not a sense of, okay, if I do this, here are the ramifications of it. There's no guard up for that. And you mentioned something. You mentioned something that when you talk about the scarcity of resources, and then you got to scramble for it, and we're only going to do it in this community and that community. You mentioned it as if it was something that was hypothetical, but I have to be honest with you. I'm scratching my head because that is a reality.
That's reality.
That is a reality for foundational and even some governmental resources. Everybody can show up for the block grant, training and information, but based upon the qualifiers, right? Everybody is not ready to apply, and everybody doesn't qualify based upon, like we mentioned, infrastructure, not understanding the process. And so I can't get ready for the block grant once I've gotten the information in the workbook on the block grant. I've got to have a sense of that's what I want to go for and build towards that months, if not a year and a half in advance, in order to build up those reserves in order to qualify for that. And I think that's where a lot of times we miss it. And so, man, I get it, and I struggle with it. And so, for you, what are you working on now in hopes of improving conditions within Southeastern San Diego and beyond?
I'm working on what we're talking about, infrastructure. Infrastructure development, and by that I mean assessing and accessing the pathways to put in place the things that we as a community need to get out from under the colonizer's thumb, right? How do we, because after 42 years, I've been actually active, doing stuff in the community for about 20 years, actively, as you say. And folks can go Google me if they want to see some of the stuff I done did. And still, we are still where we are. And so I'm not the first, and there are others who have been doing a lot of good work. Most of us are. How do I even say this? Okay, I'm gonna step into the controversy. I'm just gonna say it the way I understand it. Y'all can slap me later. The majority of us who have been in positions of responsibility over the last 20 years have been what I would call Negroizing our situation, which is to say, and I mean no harm. We need to understand. See, what we need to understand is what things mean and how they work. We have and Drews, don't come back at me on this, right? Let me finish this right here. I am the former
Oh, yeah.
president of the National Association for the Advancement of, and the name of it, Bruce, is Colored People. Okay, I get
Yes.
that. I understand how,
Yes.
how anachronistic that terminology is. However, it's a brand, right?
Thank you for admitting that. Thank you
Just
for
like
admitting that.
cornflakes, right? Kellogg's is a brand. It may be an old
Like
brand.
Aunt Jemima. Like Aunt Jemima's a brand.
Aunt Jemima. Okay, I got you. But the Aunt Jemima. And long story short, yes, colored people, right? National Council of Negro Women. I get that. And so we have, in our community, we have this term Negro, and when we say Negro, we're really talking about people who are bought into the old system that kept us under a certain degree of oppression and have moved along with that in an effort to reform these systems and get us our due. After 400 years, I think we need to take another direction. And Malcolm and Marcus Garvey, and that's some of the folks I have on my wall behind me. Toussaint Louverture, right? Because my family comes out of Haiti. That there needs to be a revolution, and the revolution needs to be in all of these areas that Neely Fuller is talking about. But critically, because we're in the United States of America, it needs to be economic and political. We need to combine our resources so we can be effective economically and and politically. And we need to take a hard look at whether or not assimilation, cooperation, and integration have run its course for our liberation. This is 2020. And like I said, back in 1965, when I was walking with my family and friends to the swimming pool, folks were doing George Floyd's on us. So 60 years later, 55, 60 years later, we came through. Let's be real about it. 1776 was 150 years after 1619. And white folks created a country, rich white men created a country that perpetuated slavery for another 100 years, right? They created this country in enslavement of black people. So if we thought that when the United States of America was created that we were going to be free, there were no illusions there, right? Maybe folks were thinking about it before they had the 3/5 compromise, but once they did that, we were compromised. Then they went to war. They fought a war, right?
But that was what they alluded to. And you could even ask an indigenous person about that. They've always offered, hey, if you side with us, there's a good chance that you'll get your freedom.
In a few hundred years.
Yeah, the same thing. Come on, man. If you look at it historically, there are blacks who fought for the Confederacy.
Oh, yeah. There are blacks who fought in the Revolutionary War.
Who were the stick was there and it was dangling a carrot and said, hey man. And they did the same thing in the Philippines. They did the same thing in Cuba. You mentioned Hawaii. They did the same thing in Hawaii. There's no way, and I'm gonna jump off this in a minute, but there's hardly any way that a imperialistic colonizing entity can overtake a people on their own land without some of those own people giving in and supporting that imperialistic movement.
Absolutely.
It happened in Africa. It happens in Asia. It's happened throughout this world.
Bruce, that's colonization, which is why you saw the indigenous people in this continent didn't get colonized. They were annihilated, right? Because the opposite. You got to look at the people who are doing this and the philosophy by which they exist, right? They said, well, we're going to colonize the North American continent. And they said, no, you're not. And they said, well, then we're just going to wipe you out. Right. In Africa, they said, we're going to colonize Africa. And you got that cooperation, things fall apart, et cetera, from Chinua Achebe. Yeah. And so we've always seen, again, the same thing. So we saw what happened when they came to this continent. We saw what happened when they founded this country. We saw what happened after the Civil War. We saw what happened after civil rights. And now we're in the next after, right? We're in the next iteration. And all the efforts we have made, here's the challenge. Let's be fundamental. I am returning to my Pan-Africanist perspectives. And let me say this a little different. When I was president of the NAACP, I was called out to the USS Somerset and did a little thing for Black History Month there. And I talked about the history of Africans and African Americans, et cetera, because it was Black History Month. And one of the brothers came up to me afterward. He said, I'm married to a white woman. And, you just talked about all this stuff about white folks and black folks. He said, so what do I do? I said, well, it's not about color, brother. It's about philosophy, right? It's about did you marry her and you became more white in terms of the way you think, more colonistic? Did you become more imperialistic? Did you become more racist, right? And more adaptive and adoptive of racist philosophies after you married her? Or did you help her to understand your perspective, where you came from, how you grew up, what your people experienced, the philosophies and understandings of the universe that your people had before we were colonized and enslaved in this continent and other continents, right? And so it's really about the way we think and feel about things. I just interviewed, I'm not going to give out too much, but because the interview will appear in the Union Tribune in the next couple of weeks, I interviewed Roosevelt Williams III. And one of the powerful things he said in that interview was that his mother taught him I think it was his mother or his great-grandmother. Read the article, you'll find out. So the 10 most powerful words in the world are, if it's going to be, it's up to us. See, and if it's going to be, it's up to me is the white perspective. It's the Western civilization perspective. It's the individualist, this whole rugged individual John Wayne thing that has never existed. Right? We have antitrust laws because they would not act independently after saying they wanted competition. Right? We have all these, that's why there's no Ma Bell anymore. That's why we broke up the banks. That's why, right? Because every time afterwards they find a way to get back together and screw up the system again, right? And so that's the whole crash, right? Was not because of rugged individualism. The crash was because they kept consolidating and combining. The crash in the banking system was not decades ago was not because they were acting independently. It's because they were collaborating, right? So all this lie they keep telling about rugged individualism, if it's going to be us. Well, they do it legally and illegally. I mean, law obviously the law is not critically important to them unless it serves them. And we need to think in the same terms, not about law per se, but what laws actually are, right? There are laws of the universe, right? People talk about, you and I, coming up under Pastor Winters, et cetera, we talk about spiritual law. And those laws are immutable, right? When we talk about spirit, we talk about religion, we talk about the immutability of some things, right? You can tell me all you want that gravity doesn't exist, but you show me the guy that steps off of a 30-story building and doesn't fall, then you have to ask him how he does that, right? That doesn't mean gravity doesn't exist anymore, because if that meant gravity didn't exist, everything that's related to gravity would cease to exist. So even though he may be able to defy gravity, that doesn't mean gravity doesn't exist. But first you need to give me that example of somebody who can defy gravity. And every time my wife and I got on an airplane, we didn't defy gravity. We didn't make it not exist. We learned and studied a principle that overrode the principle of gravity. Gravity is still as immutable as it has always been, but so is aerodynamics. Right? And so that works too. And that's the challenge that we face. And in my opinion, is that the biggest problem we face is that we have been colonized in our minds, and more importantly, we've been colonized spiritually. Now we could go deeply into what that means, because there's only two sides to that coin. And if you're not on the upward moving side of that coin, and you're on the downward moving side of that coin, then you have, if you go into religious things, especially Christianity, we talk about the entities that manage and control those movements. But we really have to get out of Western civilization thinking and go back to indigenous, right? So I got I don't know if you can see my Navajo ring, right? That we got when we went out to the Grand Canyon while we were out in Las Vegas. But if the indigenous spirit, and when I say indigenous, that includes the Kemetic spirit, right? Which are the ancient Egyptian communities that gave us the civilizations that we have today. Right, not some of the permutations that you see, but again, when we return to our roots, as Alex said, when we return to our roots, and which are the roots of humanity, then we'll find that there's a different way of thinking. And when we get to that different way of thinking, then we can begin to work toward the goals. Again, the name of my company is Omnilog, and Omnilog is all of us communicating with each other, so that we all come to a collective understanding, so that we all work toward the same goals. And so when we get there, when we manage that movement in our own minds and our own spirits, then we'll be able to overcome the colonization. And I don't know if I'm giving away a show, but then we can begin to build and talk about that beloved community, that village, right? That you asked me about earlier, that Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about.
Yeah. So jumping on that whole idea of beloved community. That's how do you What do you see or imagine when you hear those words and it's spoken in the sense of potentially attaining that beloved community?
There is, I believe it's the Journey of the Songhay People that I was reading, and what it opens up with in one of the first earlier chapters is it describes that African community, that Kemetic community, although it was West Coast, it was a Kemetic community of learning, a community of cooperation, a community of growth, a community of celebration, a community of supporting each other, because everyone understood that everyone is a human being. Every human being has the same challenges and aspirations, and that it's only by us working together and functioning together as a functional village that any and each and all of us can achieve those higher aspirations. And that's the image, the idea that I hold in my mind as he describes the way they're dressed, the way they move, the way they gesticulate, the way they talk to each other, the things that they're thinking about, the things they're talking about, and how they're doing all those things that are required for us to have that successful and functional village. The key for me, the key to achieving that is that each, and it's a hard part, because this is hard for all of us. It's for each individual to incorporate within their own being these ideas, concepts, philosophies, perspectives, ideas, as I said before. The Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, the Old Testament for the Jewish community, as we call it, the Tanakh, all of these documents, and hieroglyphs. If you go back and read the Medu, the hieroglyphs. The hieroglyphs means the sacred writings.
Meta nectar,
the meta nectar, absolutely. All articulate these concepts and constructs. If you drive down the street, you'll see bumper stickers on the back of people's cars that say coexist, and they've got all these different images they use to word out coexist, and they're all images that talk about these different religions. Fundamentally, everybody's striving for the same thing, and we as human beings need to know and understand and appreciate that that's what we're doing. But how do I do this? So coming out of the Christian tradition that you and I grew up under and developed under at Baby Baptist Church, Jesus Christ, who is the quintessential individual for our religion, said two things. One, he said, love. He kept saying love, love, love. And so I had to figure out for myself what is meant by love, what is meant by agape, this unconditional love. And for me, love is and I get this out of Jesus Christ's writings and sayings, actually, because obviously all the writings are written by somebody else. Love is the unconditional commitment to the welfare of the other. Yeah. Right? Of the other, right? Love, I can love myself, that's all well and good, but if what I'm doing...
It's outward. It comes from the inward.
Right? But it comes from the inward.
Outward.
But you got to know and understand what's happening inward before you can do it outward, right?
Exactly.
Folks, when you and I and others were working on homeless issues decades ago, long before we became so popular because of the hepatitis outbreak, and before it became as severe and terrible as it is now. Folks would say, well, there's some folks who want to be homeless. Like, no. Human beings on the planet need air, water, food, clothing, and shelter to survive, to live. And we have an automatic self-preservation instinct. Yeah, you get thirsty enough, you're gonna find you some water because you're gonna die. You get hungry, you're gonna find you some food because every human being knows that sometimes you got to get out of that sun because it's too hot. You got to get out of that air because it's too cold. Nobody wants to be homeless. They may not want to live in a place where they have to pay rent. They may not want to live with other people. There's all these other possibilities. They may even enjoy the outdoors, but even they get a tent, right? Nobody wants to be homeless. And that just goes
Maslow and the hierarchy of needs all out the window.
Right. So, and so all of us, once we understand what our own wants and needs are, what our own basic needs are, then we can appreciate what other folks' basic needs are. And love is making sure that we aren't making it more difficult for other people to get their needs met. The second one is what is a friend. And so Jesus himself said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. Right. And he says, I can't remember the biblical statement right now, although it's written in here, but I have my own way of interpreting it. It says a friend does this. A friend does And he said, greater love hath no, there it is. Greater love hath no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends, right? He didn't say his mother, father, his children, or his family. He didn't say his job or his community. He said his friends. The greater love, the greatest love that Jesus talked about. He said, greater love hath no man than this. He laid down his life for his friends. And so I interpret that to be this. A friend does and encourages you to do what is in your own best interest, right? So when I have friends who smoke, they say, man, don't talk to me about smoke. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm not trying to harass you. I'm trying to help you to be healthy, right? I'm not going to harass you about it anyway. You want to smoke, you smoke. But my responsibility as a person who loves you, cares about you, is most interested in your best interest, right? Then I need to let you know, see if you know and understand what's going on. Once I know that you know and understand what's going on, then it's my job to help you if I can to move in a positive direction. But if you want, you're a grown man, a grown woman, do what you want to do. So we talk about the beloved community. It starts within. It starts with an understanding and appreciation of who we and what we are as human beings. And that's another long, man. That's another long conversation. What and who we are as human beings. Then in projecting, like I said, love is outward projected. And then going out and working and helping to other folks to know and understand and appreciate how their humanity works with our humanity. And then we can work together to pull together that beloved community, which becomes our village. Which now here's the critical piece: 400 freaking years. When are we going to get so serious about our children not experiencing what we experience because other folks have racism against us and because we have a bad, broken system in America? When are we going to say my children are not going to experience that? Come hell or high water, whatever the cost, by any means necessary, we're going to do what has to be done. We're going to come to, I may not like Robbie Robinson, but if I need to work with Robbie Robinson, and I got other folks who say, I didn't like Robbie, but we need to get something done. And so I sat down with Robbie and we worked together and we got it done. And then after that, we went our own ways, but we got the work done first. Right. And if 40 people can get in the room and they don't like each other, that's fine. That's growth that they need to take. We need to take in ourselves. But if we can get the work done, that's what's critical. When do we get to the place where with our own spirit and mind, we have concluded that the work is more important than we are? And we're going to set our egos and our issues aside and we're going to get the work done. And then if we still have to go back and work on the issues, we do that. But the work, like I said, the collective, the family, the community, the beloved community has to be more important than whatever's going on with me. And that's difficult to do after 400 years of abuse. That's hard to do.
That's the collective responsibility. But to go back to what you said about love is often espoused, but it's rarely embodied. You understand what I mean?
Oh yeah.
We talk a good game, right? But to actually walk that out and to be in that space continually is even for what we have as the collective Christian agenda on docket today, right?
Does such a thing exist, brother? Collective Christian agenda? Yeah. On the docket? Okay, I'll let you go with that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna just put it out there like that. What's supposed to be the evangelical stance, we're still splintered about that.
Yep.
Oh, you know, and so as a collective, putting aside the differences, putting aside the differences and the dislikes and all that, to say, what is it that we need to do together to better things for our neighbor? Because the one that I love is that love does no harm to a neighbor.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. If it's really love, it may hurt you, but it's not going to harm you. You know, your ego may be bruised, but it's not going to harm you. It's not going to be a deficit to you.
Like going to the gym, right? Your workout's going to hurt you, but it's not going to harm you. It's going to make you stronger.
Yes, and so I appreciate that whole idea that you bring forth of the beloved community and what it takes to attain that and get there. And so I now fast forward you to a little touchy thing, but something that you are involved in when it comes to social justice reform. Whether we talk about it in the form of policy or practices, what do you believe to be the next appropriate reform in San Diego?
All right, so can I tell your audience that you gave me the questions in advance so I could think about them and have an intelligent answer?
Well, you're welcome to. You're welcome.
Okay. So I wrote this down. I said, and so take a deep breath, everybody, and don't expect the answer you're expecting. Here's my answer, and I wrote this down. White people of good conscience need to make a sincere commitment to anti-racism, especially white people in power. And with the help of what the Honorable Mr. Eddie Price calls communities of concern, white folks and us together must create and implement policies and practices that will make anti-racism real for the people it has harmed. So policy, none of the policies, we just got a no chokehold policy from the city, from the sheriff, and from some other folks.
Mm-hmm.
But it came after white folks in power recognized that what happened to George Floyd was going to cause the same kind of thing I witnessed in South Central Los Angeles in the Watts riots, right?
Yeah.
They said, they're gonna tear. They're gonna burn down the Union Bank building. They're gonna burn down the other buildings. There's no stopping them, right? Without martial law, which would offend white people, right? Because just saying that you got to wear a mask and go to the beach and can't go to the beach offended white people, right? So if white folks in power were to do what they want to do to black people to stop us from doing what we're going to do when you try to harm us, would offend so many good white people that white people in power made a change in policy. Not because they thought black folks deserved it or because that black folks could enforce it ourselves, but because they knew they couldn't afford to offend white folks in power. So why should I have to wait until you witness George Floyd on video, until you witness Laquan and all these others that we saw on tape, right? Why do I have to wait until you witness Alfred Alongo on white folks of good conscience? And so here's my challenge, Bruce. Mm-hmm. It's been 401 years. And we've had white folks of good conscience in power for 400 years in this continent and ain't done it yet. That's why I'm saying we need a different perspective. Now, I'm working very closely with a bunch of white folks of good conscience right now, and I think they've got a real good opportunity to make the kind of significant and rapid changes I think we need to see happen for black folks and other folks, indigenous folks especially, reparations, the whole nine. I think we got a good shot at it. But the history tells me that with Trump off the scene and no longer as a lightning rod to the extent he has been for the last 4 years, mm-hmm. right? And with Black Lives Matter now, institutionalized, and with our new president-elect coming in with Kamala Harris and bringing all these other folks into the administration, now we're going to do like we did with Mr. Obama. We're going to get complacent again. Folks are going to go back to business as usual, and our next generation is going to have to deal with the same BS 10, 15, 20 years from now. So white folks of good conscience need to make a sincere commitment to anti-racism, especially white people in power, and with the help of what the Honorable Mr. Eddie Price calls communities of concern, create and implement the policies and practices that will make anti-racism real for the people it has harmed.
You know, man, I'm gonna give you the secret sauce to what you're asking, and I want you to bear with me on this. And this is just reality. Resiliency has never come about by government reliance. And the truth of it is, and this is I'm warning all the church folks, if you want to turn off, you can turn it off right now. When FDR restructured everything that the churches had been doing and the populist movement had brought about, when we talk about welfare, when we talk about other infrastructure with this new deal, and still some of it that black towns and cities had created in order to do what one of your brothers, W.E.B., said, to live behind the veil, right? Mm-hmm. It still left blacks as third to second class citizens at best. With the very items, the food pantries, the relief efforts, the same things that people have been doing since Richard Allen had been in Philadelphia before he had a church, when he had the Free African Society. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And when we talk about it and the reliance of Send them down to the welfare office. Send them down to the WIC office. Send them down there, and the government will take care of it. Oh, write a grant, and the government will take care of it. Oh, put in a letter and have the alderman or the councilman come over here. And this whole idea of government reliance, right? They'll fix it. They'll fix it. Oh, you know what? They got some black folks in office now. I think they'll fix it. I think we're on our way. Come on now, listen. It has never altered the whole concept of resiliency that we have to have and resolve that we should have in order to advance to any level. I'll take you to one of the oddest oxymorons that I learned in religion on a pragmatic level, that a group of black folks, poor, disenfranchised, and trying to keep it together themselves, put enough money together to start a college out of an AME church, and they named it Wilberforce after the man that they said was actually fighting for their freedom. They didn't name it Lincoln. There's a whole bunch of black colleges named Lincoln. You know what I mean?
High schools too.
You know what I mean? but said Wilberforce because of how Wilberforce laid down himself, extended himself to fight to annihilate the slave trade where he was in his vineyard. And so I say that because they weren't relying on him, but they were recognizing it as they sought to, build up their own resolve and resiliency and in generations to come. And so I understand what you're saying when you say white folks of good conscience, but there have always been an element of white people of good conscience, but there's always been a limitation to the extent of which the risk can be taken. William Lloyd Garrison, how far was he willing to go before he and Frederick Douglass fell out? Right.
Well, and you put that question in the chat. What is anti-racism? That's white folk work. And as long as and there's an article. So I'm a social justice editor for Indian Voices, and there's an article in Indian Voices just came out yesterday. I don't have a link to it because I haven't. This came out yesterday. I've been doing other stuff. And in there, one of the folks who responds, and I don't know if she responded anonymously or put her name in, responded to the question on white fragility, and she agrees. And a lot of other folks said this is white folks' work. So policy, right? When we talk about policy and policy, we're really talking about the institutions that control our situation, and they're all controlled by white folks. They're all controlled by white folks. And so that anti-racism is white folks' work. And so when you ask me about the policy question, the policy work has to be done by the white folks, but the infrastructure work has to be done by ourselves. The conversation you're having, all right, that we have to identify who's doing work for us, who represents us, who has our interest at heart, and then work to put together the pieces that will influence the policymakers to make the policies that will help us continue to grow and develop.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because I think that some people they balk or they have a sense of shock, right? When we color it, when we say black or white, and but the reality is that's where we are, and the infrastructure and the system is not that. Oh well, the man at the grocery store who's behind the counter, he happens to be white, he's in power. That's not what you're saying. You're talking about actual seats of power,
right? Yeah.
And the holders of those seats by majority, right? And I appreciate people in the Black Caucus, but they're not the majority.
Nope. That's why they're.
I mean? And I'll be frank. Most of them don't even. Well, let me shut up. So I would say, as you mentioned, you have Biden coming in. You have this wave of community of color, people of color, feeling a certain way that, okay, we got this. We got this now. And, we got this under control. But I would definitely say if what you're seeing and saying about social justice reform, as well as this beloved community, are in conjunction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We're waiting on this. We ain't got this. We're waiting on this.
Well, are you saying, are you asking the question, do we have it, or are we waiting on it? Obviously, we don't have it.
No.
Obviously, we don't have it. If we had a beloved community, a contested election would have been, okay, let's wait until we get the certification. Now, if it's certified, let's call it a day. But that's not what's happening. We have the Supreme Court as all the actual legal stuff is done, and yet we still have. So I don't know, Bruce. There's more than one reality that people are functioning in. There's a matrix that some folks are functioning in. And even though they can never get the outcomes they're looking for in the way that they're going about things, they don't see that, and so they can't function in that. And so
I get that because some people don't see another alternative. Because to see it another way would be to admit certain things to be true,
right?
And to take that to another level, it's when it becomes real, it becomes real,
right? Well, for Trump and a lot of the folks who follow him, it's probably never going to become real, no matter what. But if certain things happen after January 20th, it will become real for a lot of the folks who continue to follow him. If the Republicans go back to being actually Republicans and Americans, quite frankly, and believing in democracy and functioning in that context, then I think a lot of the folks who are following Trump now, who think that what he's saying is true and real, will understand and appreciate that it's not true and real. A lot of folks never will get there. But
yeah, well, neither party is come on, man. Neither party is living to its idealism in structure.
Well, what human being and what institution and what organization is. The church doesn't either. So I mean, we can expect it from politicians. We got to do our own work.
Yeah, I'm about to say there's no purity in partisan politics. So I just float away from that one. And so I just want to wrap up with this, man. If you had to offer some advice to today's youth who are out there, those that are looking to get involved in their communities, what would you say for them to do to get started today?
Well, that's a good question. And you are the quintessential answer to that question. And my quintessential answer to that question is study, right? The Bible itself, if you take a King James version, says, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of God. I throw this out here from a secular perspective. A gentleman by the name of Sun Tzu, in his book, we look at you have to study that, people. The Art of War. He says this: if you know the enemy and know yourself, he's got the word know twice. Know, knowledge, understanding. The Bible says in the Old Testament, the Bible says, God himself says, come, let us reason together. Right. Come, let us reason. Even God himself says, look, study, let's have a conversation about stuff and learn and understand. In this very first phrase that he uses the word know twice. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. And here's a critical question and statement that Black folk in Southeastern San Diego need to ask themselves, and Black folks in San Diego and around the country had to ask themselves. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Study, man. If y'all watch and listen to Bruce, you know that he is knowledgeable. He has researched stuff. He knows stuff. He's studied, and the only way we will ever get to where we're trying to get to, only way we'll ever get the freedoms and liberty that we all talk about under the Constitution. The only way, because even the founders said, look, you can't have freedom among dumb people, right? I forget what movie I was watching, but this guy said, well, we should tell everybody the truth. And he said, people are smart. And the guy said, no, a person is smart. but people are dumb. You use the term sheeple, right? They call them sheep. They call them sheeple.
Mhm.
If you are not informed, if you are ignorant, if you are not, don't understand stuff because you haven't studied stuff, then you will be led astray by anybody's fake news, anybody's false narrative, anybody's statements, because you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy. So study, young people. Study to show yourself approved, not to your God, but to your ancestors, to your elders, and to your community, and more importantly, and equally importantly, to yourself. Study to know and understand and appreciate what it is that has to happen in order for things to actually change. And that's what you need to do to get started today. Don't just run out there and protest. Don't just run out there and start something, right? Study first so you know what has happened, what's happening, and what needs to happen going forward to make the things that you want to see happen actually exist, especially that beloved community.
Man, I mean that's it right there. I mean, you are definitely stirring it up, and I appreciate it. And that's something that we need to look at when we talk about community is such a broad topic. You know, I'm glad you're able to offer us a lot of insight in a global sense, as well as narrowing it down right to a neighborhood that we both love. You know what I mean? And so I appreciate you coming on, man, and definitely keep assessing how we will get what we need out of these organizations. And I definitely want you to come back and give us kind of a rundown on what you've uncovered and unpacked. I know you're doing some work with Indian Voices and a lot of other publications, but definitely spare nothing and come on back when you're ready to say, hey, here's what I've read, seen, and heard about who's working on community change and how that fits for that. Because my personal belief is this: in lacking an agenda, a collective agenda, then we end up limited in those that we can put forth as vetted candidates for what we would call community. And I definitely then find us wondering, and accepting or just tolerating whoever steps up.
Watch out, brother. Watch out right there.
You know what I mean?
I do know exactly what you mean. I've been that person sometimes.
but that's what happens when it's just wide open and we haven't. You mentioned George Walker Smith and his work, and and shout out to him and his daughter and Herman Collins and how they work to keep the Catfish Club alive, and that was one way of vetting, just one way of vetting folks and their readiness to represent the people of a community here. And so, thank you, man, for coming on and sharing that. And God bless. And you know what, y'all? We're going to tune out. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. I definitely will have, our next guest lined up. I don't know if they'll be as spirited as Brother Clovis. Everybody can't emulate that spirit, of keeping it on fire. But I definitely appreciate what you have shared, man, and what you have brought forward, and with everything that you're trying to do with OmniLog. Keep us in mind. This is open for you to come on and share, and just brother to brother, man, continue to keep it real.
Thank you, sir. Likewise.
All right, y'all. This has been Coffee and Chat with Rev Bruce. Y'all have a good one. Clovis, stay on. I'm going to talk to you. All right.